tools that you can start learning to develop for mixed reality. There is a great selection of tools. One of the very popular one is Unity Engine. It has a great UI which allows you to drag and drop objects or assets and create your applications right at the UI level. But if you want to add more behavior to it, you can create some scripts with C# in Visual Studio and debug your application there as well. And we have an emulator for HoloLens that you can use directly from Visual Studio. Another great tool that we are supporting now is Unreal Engine, and it's a very popular tool among designers. And if you're developing for the web, we have multiple choice. Babylon.js is a great library which has amazing examples and a playground that you can start playing with. 3.js and A-Frame are two other very popular libraries that you can start playing today. You can choose from any of these tools to get started with mixed reality.
Hello everyone. Hello Ivo. Thank you very much for being here today. It's great to have you here for this wonderful talk on meta media futures, and I think we're going to have a great time just listening a bit more from your experience about this. Well, let's call it brave new world that is awaiting for us.
Thank you for having me here at Global XR Conference. And to be clear, this is a conversation about the broader metaverse and its convergences with media as a whole. So we're going to talk about a wide variety of different dynamics of these networks. We're going to talk about what's happening in the public space. And certainly there are a number of things that might touch any number of endeavors you might be working on, whether that's educational or in any aspect, field, or sector across the board. So hi, thank you for that introduction, by the way. I appreciate that. My name is Ivo Haining. I've been a creator, producer, strategist, consultant, co-founder in both media and technology companies and in education as well. And if you want to find me, by the way, please feel free to reach out. This is going to be a very broad conversation about metaverse media futures and how these convergences might touch on a number of different fields. So we're going to be taking a pretty broad approach to looking at the space of participatory media. Now, that includes a lot of different things. Obviously, this is alt space, as many of you have spent time there. You may know this place. This is particularly BRCVR, which is a festival that happens yearly and has been a part of a creative community going on for decades, but recently found its home in the metaverse as a ongoing global collaborative community. So we're going to talk about the ramifications of these types of communities and what happens when we all come together to build these types of networks together. I'm going to encourage you to feel free to put your chat and questions in, and I'm hopeful that some of those will get filtered back to me so that we can take them at the end of this session, because at the end of the day, this is a participatory process as well. We're here to have a conversation, and at the end of the day, we, all of you here, we are the media. So that changes a number of things about how we create together. We are recentering ideas of ownership and who owns media. We are resetting the idea of collective and generative power and meaningful social action together. So when you hear about different things happening in the metaverse, whether that could be DAOs and NFTs, or looking at other layers of community-centered dynamics and how creative communities are thriving, much of this is resetting a conversation about what creator-centered communities can become. And at the end of the day, it is resetting the value proposition. I can tell you I've met with hundreds of creators over the last, especially during the pandemic, but even just recently, such as these artists who are in, who have been creating in VR chat. This was from a collective art experience that they made around Halloween. And what we're seeing is lots of relatively lightweight, open source experimental groups coming together to form new types of experiences, art shows, media series, virtual beings, all sorts of spin-outs that are from the XR culture, but are pulling those into new directions, right? So they might be specific to something like VR and VR chat, or they might be something that is akin to what we used to do in Second Life. So we're going to take a little bit of a journey from the old school virtual worlds, which is where I started in this industry and in this R&D discovery process as a creator producer. And we're going to go from the early 2000s all the way up to modern day and the immersive web. And we're going to talk a little bit about light fields, holography, volumetric, because metaverse media includes all of these things. We're not just talking about VR and AR. We're not just talking about what's happening in game worlds or on the open web. We're talking about the spatial web as well and how that's going to interface with places. We're talking about what is happening in holographic data and volumetric data as well. So obviously this is a bit of a paradigm shift. It's also a value shift, and it is a way in which we are beginning to look at the exchange of our assets differently. Now, there are many different approaches to that. I work on interoperability, and specifically I co-chair a community called the Open Metaverse Interoperability Community Group. Within that group, there are hundreds of creators from all over the world. Some of them are very into Web3 ideas, using cryptocurrencies, NFTs for some of that asset sharing. Others feel very strongly that that probably shouldn't be the way we go. And so figuring out how do we come together and invent and create, even when we can't necessarily agree on how the cardboard should get into people's homes, that is why this is a very rich experimental breeding ground right now. We're going to see lots of new endeavors created from this fertile landscape, and they have been for 2-3 decades now. This is a shot from 2008. I wanted to show you a little bit of old school metaverse media. So this was a community I created for Second Life. It's called the Nonprofit Commons. And within the Nonprofit Commons, we've been running fundraisers, nonprofit collective actions, going back to 2006, I believe. This piece, I believe it was 2008 NBC News. So I wanted you to see that what we're seeing now in terms of immersive engagement and in community-driven endeavors, in philanthropy even, these are not necessarily new stories. They are happening in new places and in new ways. Same with this piece here. This is a piece I produced in 2009, early when Obama came into office. He gave a talk from Ghana. We then streamed that into Second Life, into MetaPlace, and then we built a chat bridge to begin connecting across worlds. And this was an early form of metaverse media. This was both a live event, a streaming event all over the world, and a place where people could come and participate in the process of global diplomacy. This was produced with the State Department here in the US. So I wanted you to see that progression just a little bit so you could understand some of the R&D that has happened under the hood and some of the experimentation that's been happening for the last few decades in our field. Obviously, 2021 Metaverse Media looks a little bit different. This is from maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. Again, VR chat, but this is a community called the XR Social Club where we're just rolling around and exploring and going to different locations. And while this is a meetup of professionals, it doesn't obviously look like that, right? This happens to be a group of producers who are meeting up together to explore ways of collaborating. This is, in some ways, the future of the media landscape we're dealing with. This is where we take meetings. And that wasn't necessarily a super common thing prior to the pandemic. It is extremely common now. So we're going to sort of step back a little bit and give you the big picture strategy. And actually, I don't know if Lewis can change our view, but I want to give you the sort of 100,000 view from all the way out in the middle of the galaxy for a second to think about what the metaverse really is. So there's a lot of conversation. Is there one metaverse? Is there tons of metaverses? Like what is the right way to begin thinking about how these spaces are fitting together? I like to use the analogy of a universe and thinking about the vastness of the universe and thinking about how galaxies, solar systems, planets, and other bodies fit together as well. Each of us plays a role. Each of us is a node in that vast network. And some of you might be creating platforms, planets, destinations. Some of you might be creating ways to traverse. Some of you might be working on the communication layer. Some of you might be working on the fuel or the method by which we are going to begin to do this whole world of space travel. Figuring out space travel, just from the sort of baby steps, is where we're at right now. We are not necessarily at a fully charted metaverse. We don't necessarily even know the lay of the land. And so with my colleagues at Open Metaverse Interoperability, along with colleagues all over the world, some of you here, we've been working on beginning to both map the metaverse as an open source repo and a library for all of us to use together. But again, it's partially about sense making and then layering the information we need in order for interoperability, like space travel, to work between all of our galaxies and solar systems. Because right now we do have these very disparate ways of working and they don't necessarily mesh well. So we're going to dive into what we need in order for that sort of longer term interoperability to thrive. And I know a number of the developer talks that have come prior have already touched on some of this. Obviously, WebXR, connecting structures and things like A-Frame. If you're trying to get started in this field, A-Frame, Blender, WebXR, these are great places to start because they are where we are already agreeing to share assets and share experiences on the open web. So we are seeing that volumetric data, those 3D models and assets, let's say the GLTF spec, for example, but also your GLB models. We need to figure out how those models are going to work with worlds that include voxel art, video art, and work together effectively around sharing that information. Now, that is not necessarily easy depending on where your platform is or how you choose to receive and share assets in your own platforms. Figuring out how we share this information is one of the sort of structural elements right now happening within this movement. Figuring out how we're going to deal with addressability from 2D to 3D to 4D, because all of these issues end up dealing with how metadata is passed between us and the agreements that we're making in order for us to work together effectively. So that includes the spatial layers as we described, and that includes Web3, that includes everything happening with the fantastic immersive web group at W3C, and all of the groups and bodies that have been taking us through the last now 2 decades of metaverse development. So to step back, I was a part of a group that came together in 2005 to develop something called the Metaverse Roadmap. Now, this was very early stage. It was obviously built on some of the sort of Neil Stephenson sci-fi snow crash elements, but also the sense that all of these technologies were going to converge. AR, VR, live streaming, digital twins, all of these things touch on how we share information between these layers of our lives. And that includes sensors and our interfaces, our identities and what we can take with us, and then how we layer that information together. Obviously, that has developed tremendously. This slide is from Sandy Carter at AWS, and she's building on the work of Ray Wang at Constellation to think about the beginnings of how this layers together. So you may be thinking very early stage, well, how does XR and DAOs and NFTs all fit together? These are the start of decentralized media networks. Now, these media networks have two sides. They are facing the public, and they look in some ways like streaming networks and gaming networks, but they are also creator-centered, and they are providing for creator-centered media networks to thrive as well. So both of those economies are driving the development at the same time. So if you're hearing a ton about metaverse, it's like part of that drive is because there are so many creators pushing in right now who want to see this space thrive. They have a creative voice, they want to publish, and they want it to be able to be participatory and playful and creative and generative. So that's where, if you begin thinking about where you've published and whether that's an individual experience or a platform, winding that up into what is the collective of metaverse media. This is from the show Alter Ego. That is possibly one example of an early virtual beings type show that bridges between these worlds, that's using both the physical and the digital to tell a different type of story. Now, there will be 50 more shows like this in the years to come. Now, you layer that with all the WebXR experiences, with the VR documentaries, and all of the other types of media that are really designed for the immersive web specifically, that aren't designed for your television or for traditional linear outputs. This changes a little bit of the dialogue, and it changes how we produce. So this is from an experience I created with a team in New York Live Arts, and the platform is called Nowhere. Nowhere is an open web platform in the sense that they are built on top of A-Frame. It is a proprietary platform. You have to pay them to use this for your events. But what they've created is something that's relatively easy to get to for groups of people on the open web, to be immersed in a beautiful place, but to still feel like themselves. So that's a very different type of event engagement, right? That's a sticky one-time offer. That's a virtual gallery that lets people feel like they're already there. But that's a one-time thing. That's an open website that is only there for a few days and then disappears. And those ephemeral things aren't necessarily the long-term connecting tissue. They're sort of the gateway. What that ends up becoming as you get millions of people excited about building more and more doors and gateways together is whole new ways of working, whole new types of media channels. This happens to be a colleague of mine at OMI named Jin. Jin's colleagues have been creating a new type of media series based across multiple virtual worlds. And so they are traveling the metaverse and telling these stories using NFTs as part of their story weaving dialogue, right? So they're sharing assets together in this very lightweight Web3 decentralized way, but still using the tools of the global XR community to do that bridging work. So I want to step back just one more second to think about what that interactivity enables in all of us, because we are empowering creative movements that are going to change the expectation of agency. And this is already happening amongst a number of leaders in the Web3 space, I would say especially, once we understand that we can create the worlds we want and that we can work together to forge those futures, it changes our capacity to do that. We get hooked on those wins. We get hooked on being able to create something meaningful. And this kind of experimentation has been working in lightweight ways in gaming and in play for a very long time. But what we're seeing now is that it can be applied to collective work, design, simulations, and together we can begin to unravel things that were very tricky for us to do together 10, 20, 30 years ago. Let's say remote design work, for example, with a VR headset and everyone in their headsets together, the collaboration landscape changes. Now, for producers and for creators, that changes the decisions we make. Because if we want to drive specific types of collaboration, we need to think about the environments we create for people and the embodiment we allow or give for or provide means for. So there are very open worlds where you can be anything you want, and there are very closed worlds where you have to be a very specific type of avatar. There are worlds that don't use avatars at all that might use your video form. Each of those has a different emotional response in the participants, and each of them might be appropriate for different use cases. They set tone, they set energy, they make it easier or harder to collaborate. And so you have to think about those things when you're creating the experience, and then thinking about on top of that, okay, is this accessible? And if I'm trying to do something for all ages, is it perhaps on the open web? Can people get to it on a URL like this experience in hubs? Is that an appropriate use of the technology? These are the kinds of conversations that, while many of us who have been in XR are well versed in asking these questions, people coming from a traditional media mindset or from other creative arts aren't necessarily well versed in how to ask these questions together before putting together a new type of immersive experience. Same when it comes to safety, privacy, appropriateness, and appropriately easy for the audience. This happens to be Roblox. Roblox is one of those places that is incredibly easy. So it enables a different type of dialogue and conversation to happen. It also enables a different type of accessibility to happen. So you might have conversations between 70-year-olds, 40-year-olds, and 7-year-olds. And that's a very different dialogue space. It's more like a public park. We have not yet figured out what are going to be the appropriate rules for all the public parks. What we have now are private parks with very specific, like a TOS and a EULA, so that everyone knows how they're supposed to engage in that space. That doesn't necessarily mean that the metaverse is a safe space, or that it's available across devices, or that it is appropriate for children. In some cases, that is absolutely not the case. With that said, there is tremendous experimentation happening to figure out how to deliver these experiences on the open web in ways that teenagers are already very much engaged in. And if you're a parent, I would suggest, go along with your kids and explore where they're exploring, because they may be already engaged in NFT markets and in other spaces that you may not have thought of as part of the XR landscape. So I get a lot of questions about the meta part of this conversation. And to be very clear, the metaverse is vast, and I am personally here because I believe in an open metaverse where it is a public commons where all of us can collaborate and thrive, but also to be able to own our own work is important to me personally as a creator. So I believe that we need to keep working toward that open space together. And I like this quote because it's very much that we are going to craft this space together. If you want to build that open metaverse that everyone can thrive in, don't herd people together to collect wood, and don't assign them tasks and work. Teach them to long for the endless immensity of the sea. the vastness of what we can create together is really exciting here. And it can be deeply inclusive, like this Pride experience in alt space. And it can be equitable. It can be creator-centered, and it can be attributable to the people who are making it, so that we're righting some of the wrongs that happened in previous iterations of both our technology networks and our media networks. We have a bad track record. If you look at internet media, television, most of our media networks don't necessarily do a great job of attributing the creators of the work. This is a problem of metadata. This is a problem of how networks deal with value and attribution. This is also a problem for all of us when we think about how do we share our stories together, and how do these stories persist, not just within a single network, but across institutions, living within the libraries, within the archive.orgs of the world. So we're here for a metaverse that's more human. This is the values from OMI, and I wanted to put this up here because in particular, I believe we need to be constantly resetting our ideas of what this space can become to be more human-centric, to be more equitable, to be more resilient and sustainable and appropriate, and to deliver value for everyone, not just for a small number of people who happen to have access to specific technologies or to specific means. So I would encourage you, if this is interesting to you, this is the value set from OMI Group. omigroup.org is a Discord, GitHub. We're on Twitter at Open Metaverse, on Reddit at Open Metaverse, and we encourage open collaboration and participation, because at the end of the day, this is the work. This is figuring out the interpersonal work of interoperability in order to create something that isn't as toxic as previous iterations of social networks on the web. So how do we deal with accessibility for all, equality for all, communities that can thrive long term, but are also safe and appropriately private in some cases as well? This graphic is from Christopher Lafayette, who's a leader in Silicon Valley, doing tremendous work in enabling a large number of creators, but in also setting standards that are human-centric and not just code-centric. We do need the protocols. We need to be able to collaborate effectively, but we also need to stay human, and we need to be able to see each other and honor each other before we spin out a million different identities. And I love my identities. These are some of my avatars. I like to explore different types of fluidity, anonymity, being able to be as I feel most appropriate. And that might be green skinned for me, and that might look completely differently for you. So how we deal with self-sovereign identity, decentralized identities, plural, and allow for each other to be whoever we choose to be in these worlds. Obviously, you might have a world where you want people to be apes. That's cool. Obviously, for some people, that is a generative landscape. It can look like anything at all in your world. If you've been into virtual beings or avatars or any of that space, there are guilds forming specifically for virtual beings. There's a hackathon coming up with the Virtual Beings Summit. You can absolutely check out at the Culture DAO, I believe is their URL. But we see these sort of decentralized movements just sprouting up all over the world. They are forming new types of public commons, and they're doing it across the globe. It is not specific to one country, one continent, or one way of working. This is happening across the globe, across continents, across different ecosystems, and across different fields. So what are the biggest challenges we're facing when we're trying to connect these spaces? It's certainly how we bring our social graph with us as well as our identity in a meaningful way. Not all worlds are open. And this is a quote from John Radoff, one of our colleagues at Beamable. He mentions the pain, and specifically it's a pain to move communities between social applications, let's say from a community in Altspace to a different open web community, because each platform owns your social graph when you're within their walls. In a world in which you are sovereign over your identity and your social graph, you and your friends will move frictionlessly between different experiences. Now, some of us obviously have been solving for this problem around friction by using tools such as GitHub or using Discord, because open source tools do provide that sort of connecting tissue and ability to collaborate. Now, this is also a map from John. Now, if you look at this, this is the September field map for the market. And this is November. So within 2 months, I'm going to do that one more time. I want you to see how much growth we've seen in 2 months' time. Now, this doesn't even include most of the independent layer. That includes developers, associations, and all of the other support systems that drive the creator economy. So there is just tremendous growth. There's a reason for that tremendous growth. There are billions of young creators who want to make new work and don't see an opportunity to do so, so they're going to make that happen. They're going to be creating new networks nonstop. It's already happening. It's going to continue to grow exponentially. And that includes DAOs, that includes Web3 startups, that includes different ways of creating worlds, sharing worlds, discovering worlds, and making media that rolls up into new types of media networks. This is Kent Bai. I know many of you know him and enjoy his Voices of VR podcast as well as his interviews. And I appreciated where he really sort of brings the layers of this experience together into the connected and interconnected graph. So if you think about how these relationships play out, this is obviously a conversation about hardware, software, technology, but it also touches upon design, education, economy, the laws and policy, and the cultures that we're creating on top of these things. And so making sure that we're doing this work effectively together, while also making sure that we're creating something meaningful and fun and appropriate at the same time. This happens to be in Roblox. I have a sort of therapeutic space, I would call it. It's a theme park that is dedicated to the show Twin Peaks. Now, people often ask me, why did you do that? And I was grieving at the time. It's been a rough pandemic for me personally, and I needed a space to just go ride roller coasters. So I built a huge theme park. I think it's bigger than Disney. It's about 50 rides, 15 roller coasters, and it takes people on this journey. And so we're beginning to think about, how do we share assets? How do we share stories? How do we make them interoperable and playful, but also really engaging and fun? So here you can see some of those roller coasters, and I take people here all the time. And what's fun about this space is that you begin to see the marriage of creative communities and fandoms with general audiences. You meet 7-year-olds and grandparents who are coming together just to go ride rides. And then you happen to meet someone who's a huge fan, and they come in and they want to tell the story of a specific character. So it's like taking the magic of theme parks and immersive worlds into these environments and then playing them out, and just playing them out in fun ways, seeing what happens and letting the fandom create its own ripples. If any of you've read Henry Jenkins and Convergence Culture, these sorts of elevated fandoms creating their own worlds has been happening for decades. Obviously, shows like Star Trek have given their own series to these kinds of media projects. And I would suspect that shows like Star Trek will often be the first ones to bring a holodeck to life. As we begin to see metaverse media in 3D and 4D, it is going to be in places like theme parks, and it's going to be in sci-fi. It's going to be in the TARDIS. It's going to be in Star Trek. It's going to be in the Avatar world and in the Star Wars world at the theme park. So this is all woven into physicality. When we're talking about the metaverse, it's not just a digital space. It includes all of the immersive and digital layers that we've described, but those things also touch the physical world, and that's IoT, that's sensors, that is how we sense and move through physical spaces. Theme parks are a really great way to think about this, but down the road, we might be wearing our smart glasses and have every piece of this tracked and shared to specific permissioned organizations. How that data is tracked, shared, and who has permission is the big question right now. And so all of these layers and conversations are continuing to unfold. Obviously, this is both a generative space and a regenerative space. And so figuring out how we learn from both the lessons of technology and the lessons of nature to build healthier organizations. Also learning from each other and listening to each other. This is my colleague, Monica Bielski, who has done a fantastic job encapsulating what she describes as protopian futures. And protopian futures are anchored, in plurality, in ritual, in community, in physical presence as much as in the sharing of our creative lives. And so making sure that we are designing for those protopian futures so that if we're walking into a new immersive landscape, it might be a physical world that we're touching. It might be a digital twin of a town in Japan that we are going to start moving through. And our ripples in that space might have an impact on that physical place in real time. We're not there yet, but these are the lessons that we're discovering together. And one of the things that has been most interesting, but also most challenging from an interoperability point of view, is how we move between these worlds effectively. Like right now, if you're on television, you pick up your remote, you change the channel, or you go to a different streaming service and you got out of Hulu and you're in Netflix, and that's your move. It isn't always that simple. When you're thinking about how we move across the metaverse right now, those aren't necessarily connected ecosystems. We do have the web. The web does connect us in some ways, but there's a great deal of work to do when it comes to actually connected metaverse experiences. I think some people have said we're at sort of these early days of the internet, like 1994, or if you're thinking about television, we're at those like early 50s era television. So this is a very early developing stage of the process, and it's okay to experiment and explore and see what works. This happens to be VCAT in the cloud. VCAT is a virtual market, a global festival that happens both in VR chat, but also now through web cloud clients where you can walk around and embody an avatar and explore different art experiences, much like other virtual festivals. Now, what we're starting to see is that meta-traversal, or that moving between these worlds, looks as simple as a little portal or something you might see in another sort of sci-fi story. So I just walk from one world to the next. The agreements and the protocols to get there, it's going to take some time, the same way television took time, the same way Web 1 took time. So figuring out why specific elements matter, like accessibility, privacy, safety, appropriate and ethical practices that build trust. These are the work that we're doing right now, and it's happening all over the world. I know many of you are leading these fantastic efforts. This is from the Cyber XR Coalition, a fantastic organization. You should definitely sign on with what they're doing, along with xrsi.org, and all of the fantastic work happening next week at XR Safety Week. So I want to just reiterate, this is vast community work. One second, I'm going to lose my voice if I keep going. These communities are decentralized. They are working remotely. They are connecting through places like Discord. I mean, we're using GitHub, Twitter Spaces, Discord, shared documents like Figma. But we're doing this work in the open. And that is a whole movement. Excuse me, I'm going to do my best not to lose my voice. I think I'm almost ready for questions. So
Ivo, thank you so much for this. This was a great presentation. It actually touched so many different places and worries that right now we have with the metaverse that is being built. And I think all of us at this point are truly expecting to build the best metaverse ever. But at the same time, we have to be also very conscious about our responsibility to create a safe, trustful, interoperable, and well, respectful environment for all of the users. And again, your work with your research in interoperability with your interoperability group is invaluable. I have a question to start with.
yes.
At this point, I see that we have, well, let's say that the metaverse at this point is at the intersection of several, well, four big sectors, or like that. So on one side, we have blockchain with cryptos and NFTs. The second one are games and game engines and gaming communities. The third one, well, pretty much we're talking about social media. And the fourth one is XR. So do you see any of these areas in the lead to build in building the push for the metaverse in, well, in the next year, in 2022?
So let's make sure I am not muted. All right. Sorry about that. When you speak of those sectors, there are clearly sectors that are leading, right? We know that there's been a huge boom in NFTs this year, for example. NFTs enable asset sharing potentially across the metaverse. So if I wanted to have my hat on my avatar and then have permissions to use that hat across the metaverse, NFTs might be the mechanism for it. We don't know. We don't know if that's going to work yet. So what you're seeing is this giant bubble. Could be generative, or it could be an experiment that kind of, we win some, we lose some. We don't know yet. There's clearly a lot of big wins in enterprise XR, training, everything happening in warehousing, supply chain logistics, health and wellness. Huge wins there, but I would say most of them are happening in relatively smaller or private sector things, less in public sector. Public sector, there is far less funding there, and that's civic tech, using digital twins for solving like complex problems, let's say water systems, climate action, disaster response. All of that is huge opportunity space where there could be this fantastic intersection of using the metaverse to run meaningful simulations, tell stories together, learn from them, and then build better, right? And so we're talking about an iterative feedback process that the metaverse can enable. It's a science lab in the cloud of sorts, right? It's an infinite lab where we can do experimentation together if we design the space to enable that. I'm going to give you the headset for you so that we get away from reverb. Sorry about that.
This because
No worries.
for me, it actually I don't feel it that much, but
Totally fine.
it's better this way. So great, and it was really a great answer, and as all great answers opens a lot more doors and pathways. I really think that we could be here like well, much more time just talking about this or around this. But let me then just pass on also yet another one. Again, kudos on your vision of how the web and the spatial web all can come together as the infrastructure for the metaverse to come. But getting back to let's say the assets and all the storytelling that you can do around those assets. What do you think that at this time is needed for instance, again, augmented reality storytelling and this AR cloud storytelling to actually be starting or to become more, I wouldn't say available, but more common in our days and
Right.
life.
We've already thought of AR storytelling as happening through TikTok and Instagram, right? Like we've kind of built those layers into Snapchat. So that's sort of that nascent space that's already highly used and includes augmented reality layers. If you think about how do we find and discover augmented reality experiences, that's a challenge right now. There are thousands of producers making great filters all over the world. But when you think about where do you go to find their content and then browse and discover, the AR space, the NFT space, virtual worlds, many of these spaces have the same problem. And it's not just a publishing problem, it's a discoverability problem, right? So we built search for the web to work with a 2D web. And metadata and search haven't really evolved fully to be appropriate for the immersive web yet. Now, there's lots of interesting ideas about how to rethink search for the metaverse and to rethink discovery and to rethink what media channels look like, because they probably don't look like television or Netflix. They probably look a little more like a virtual world or like a place that we walk through already. Some of us are experimenting in that interface layer, and how do we make it super easy for thousands of us to all publish together? That's what if you look at what's underneath DAOs, for example, that collective publishing momentum and collective value building momentum. How do we share value together effectively? There's some exciting research happening there, and it's also funding tremendous research and development too. We're seeing DAOs that are basically enabling grants to the R&D layers that need to happen around trust, around evolving protocols, around looking at addressability, looking at every aspect, Linux browsers for the metaverse, every aspect of R&D when you think about the metaverse and sort of those fringes to come. They are being developed, but they're being developed in these tiny little pockets. They aren't necessarily fully connected. They're not necessarily sharing information effectively yet, except through places like Twitter and Discord, which also feel like a fire hose and are very difficult to search. So I would encourage all of you who think about information management and how to structure data. We've been thinking about it from a mapping the metaverse perspective, the 3D layers of interoperability and how we begin to data viz around this problem. But I think there's a lot of room for discovery and experimentation and really figuring out what every layer at the stack needs to look like for all different types of audiences, right? PBS looks different than Netflix for a reason. And kids channels need to look different than adult channels for a reason too. So figuring those things out and then figuring out how, you know, maybe this community can use NFTs and DAOs, and maybe this community is going to stay completely, you know, agnostic or away from that side of the conversation. There's a lot of debate happening there right now. So I don't want to open up a big can of worms, but I do want to say there is a lot of room for experimentation and discovery. And if you're interested in these topics, come join us at Open Metaverse Interoperability. It's a community group at omigroup.org. And we meet weekly on Discord and through Twitter Spaces.
Wonderful. Ivo, this was really great, and again, I think that we need to open more cans of worms because they pretty much are well, they are for at this time. I think they are the ones that actually feed our brains and make us more prepared to create and to build the upcoming metaverse. Again, thank you very much, Ivo, for this. Had a wonderful time, and well, thank you all for being with us.
Yeah.
And yeah, again, as Ivo said, if you're looking to extend this conversation with her, you are more than welcome to join the interoperability group that you may find. I don't know if you want to leave an URL, Ivo.
Right. It's omigroup.org, but if you're on Twitter, it's open_metaverse. There is now a Reddit at Open Metaverse. The Twitter spaces happen regularly. My handle is Amoration, and I'll go ahead and put that up for you. You're all welcome to follow me anytime, and definitely hit me up if there's any way I can help you at all.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Looking forward to creating with all of you. Let's go make amazing new worlds. This is from a sci-fi world that I started writing a long time ago, and I would love to see how all of you want to plug in together. Thank you, and have a great day, Louis. Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Thank you all. Cheers, and have a good one.